All right, in this section I'm going to talk about databases, and specifically I'm going to show an example of how you use Microsoft Access. This example is going to mimic what you're going to need to do for your homework assignment this week. This video is probably the single best tool to help you get through your homework assignment. I mean, I would still advise, obviously, reading the other information and looking at the links that I provided, but this will be very close to what you're going to do for your homework assignment. I'm just using a different set of databases and tables. And so in the example that I'm going to show there's a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet has 3 tabs associated with it. This is a little different because in the example that you have in your homework, you're actually going to have 3 separate spreadsheets. They're not all included in one spreadsheet on different tabs, but it's essentially the same concept. So we're going to create a sales database. And this sales database is going to have a table that's going to keep track of the salesperson data, another table that's going to keep track of the sales that the salesperson actually made, and then another table that's going to keep track of the products that the salesperson can sell. So the first thing that I would do in your homework assignment is look at the spreadsheets. Look at the spreadsheets and make sure that you're familiar with the data and how the data relates to each other. So for example, this is our main table here, salesperson table. When you look at the sales table, you'll see that it keeps track of the salesperson ID. That salesperson ID relates back to the salesperson table. You will see in this example that salesperson 1 has 2 rows in this table because they made 2 sales. Same thing with salespersons 2 and 3. And then the last one, these are the products that they can sell. So there's a total of 4 different products. If you look at the sales table, or spreadsheet in this case, there's a reference to the product that was actually sold by that salesperson. So first I recommend you familiarize yourself with the data. The next thing is you're going to go into Microsoft Access. I already have Access open, and I'm going to open a blank database. And I'm going to create a blank database. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to import the data from the spreadsheet. So I'm going to click on External Data. I will say that I'm using Access 2013, and so depending on which version of Access you're using, your toolbar and the way that you do this could be slightly different. But I'm going to click External Data. I want to bring it in from Excel. I'm going to need to go and find my Excel file so I know where I have that stored. And it's in this Sales LSX file, so I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to choose the first option here, import the source data into a new table in the current database, and that's what you're going to choose for everything that you're importing. The next thing is it asks which worksheet you want to import. Now when you're doing yours, each spreadsheet is in a different file, so you're not going to have different worksheets. But in this case, the first worksheet that I'm going to import is salesperson. I click Next. My first row does contain column headings. You see if I unclick that, it thinks that the column heading becomes part of the data. We actually want that to be the field name, so we're going to check that box. And then it is going to ask about field options. You don't need to worry about this for every field, but for example, this first field, salesperson ID, we know that this is a unique column, so we do not want to allow duplicates to be imported into this column. Now here for the primary key, you can let Access add a key or you can choose your own. Since we know that this first column is unique, we're going to use that for our primary key. A primary key has to be unique. So we're going to use salesperson ID. And then we're going to choose that table name. We can use the default there. We don't need to save the steps. And then if we click here, you see there's the data. So it looks very similar to what we saw in the spreadsheet. If I do this and go to salesperson, it looks essentially the same. It's just in a spreadsheet now. The other thing you can do when you open Access, it's going to create a table by default. My recommendation is to delete that table. It says that it's open. So actually we can come up here and we can say close that default table, and then it will allow us to delete it. So that probably will just cause confusion later if you leave that table in there. So the next thing, we're just going to go through and do each one of those. These are the 3 files that you're actually going to import: donor, fund, and pledge for your homework assignment. But for this example, I'm using sales. And I will go now and I'll choose the second worksheet. And first row contains column headings, yes. Salesperson ID. Now in this case, salesperson ID is not unique. So we can't make that unique. So we're just going to say yes, duplicates are okay. And then that carries on to this part of the wizard. We're going to let Access define a primary key because we don't actually have one in this table. We're going to choose sales. We're going to finish. And now we see that our sales data is there, and that looks just like it did in our spreadsheet. So last thing, we're going to quickly go and import the last one, which is product. It does contain column headers. Now the product does have a unique value. So product ID is unique. We do want it to be indexed, so we're going to say no duplicates. And then we can use that as our primary key. We don't have to have Access add one. All right, and so there's our product. So now we have all 3 of those spreadsheets imported into Access. And so now we have a database that contains 3 separate tables. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to define the relationship between these tables. So I am going to click on Database Tools. I'm going to click Relationships, and we are going to, I'm holding down my Control key and selecting all 3 of these tables. You can do them individually, but I'm going to select all 3 of them here. So here's our 3 tables. I am going to put the salesperson table in the middle, just because I know that's kind of the primary table where the main data is stored. And then what we're going to do is, actually I'm going to put sales in the middle. We need to define the relationship between these tables. And so for example, I'll make these a little bit bigger so we can see them. We know that the product ID is going to map to the product ID in the sales table. And so then you get this edit relationships that shows up. And you'll see product ID field to product ID field. We're going to click on the Enforce Referential Integrity checkbox. And that essentially is going to enforce a relationship between the 2 tables. It means that the primary key in the main table must contain a value for the reference table. So basically what that means, I'm going to go ahead and click Create here. Oh, and actually the reason it's not letting me do that, I'm going to click Cancel. If you have the tables open, it's not going to let you create those relationships. So I'm going to go and close all 3 of those tables. It's probably good that I did that because you might run into that when you're doing your homework assignment. So let's go back and create the relationship. And you'll see that it created a one-to-many relationship between those 2 tables. So basically what that means, if I go into the sales table and try to add a value that doesn't have a valid product ID, it's not going to let me do that. So for example, let's open the sales table, and let's say that we'll just try to add some data. Salesperson 1 on 1/1/2018. Let's say product ID 22. We know that doesn't exist. You cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in the product table. And so this is doing data validation essentially. It's making sure that nothing gets added from a product standpoint into this table that doesn't already exist over in the product table. So I'm going to hit my escape key to escape out of that. And then I'm also going to go ahead and close that table and go back over here. So that's what the referential integrity did. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a link between the salesperson ID from those two tables, from the salesperson to the sales table. I'm going to enforce referential integrity as well. And then you see that it created that relationship as well. And this 1 and that infinity sign is signifying that this is a one-to-many relationship. So for every single salesperson in this table, there can be many in this table here, because for every sale that they make, there's going to be a row for that salesperson. All right, so that shows how the relationships work. The next thing that we need to do is to create a query. So I am going to create a query, and I'm going to use the query design as opposed to the query wizard. And before you create your query, what you want to make sure of is you want to understand the data that you want to report on. And so in your homework assignment, my suggestion is to read the instructions very carefully about what data is required. When you run your query, only bring in the required data. So don't bring in every possible field. That can actually make the query much more complicated, and we're just creating a very simple query for this example. So that's a hint. Only bring in the data that's required. And so in this example here, we want to report on the salesperson. We essentially want to see the salesperson's first name, their last name, and the amount, the total amount that they have sold. And so if you think about that, the product table isn't even needed for that, because we need to get the salesperson's first and last name. We need the salesperson table, so we will add that. And then the sales table is where that amount is stored. So we need the sales table as well. And look, it carried forward the relationship between those two. The next thing that you do is you'll need to click the fields that you want to add. So down here at the bottom under field, I'm going to click this drop down, and I want the salesperson's first name. And then I'm going to come over to the next one, and I'm going to choose their last name. Notice both of those are out of the salesperson table. And then the amount field, I'm going to come all the way down here to the sales table. It says sales.sales amount, and that's the sales amount field that I want. So at this point, you can actually go ahead and click the Run button, and it will run that report. And you see that you have all the data. So this is all the sales data being reported on. It's showing 6 rows. But what I don't have here is I want a sum. I want the sum for the total of Bob Jones. I don't want to see that there's one sale for $10,000 and one for $2,000. I want to see the total. And so what you need to do is come back into your query. I did a right click here on the query, and I'm going back to design view. And then you're going to come up here and you're going to say, I want to report on totals. And so you're going to click this totals column here. And then down under sales amount, you're going to say that you want the sum. I want to get the sum of the sales amount. And watch what happens now when we run that query. We only have 3 rows, and it totaled it. So now we can see that Bob Jones' total is $12,000, and it doesn't show 2 rows. How easy is that? I mean, sorry, I get really excited about databases, but that's pretty cool. And you could do that in Excel, but it's not that easy. It's not quite as easy as it is in Access. The last thing that I want to show is, let's go back to design view, and you can actually, oh actually I want to run the report again. Sorry, we're going to run the report. When you run the report, if you click on this total up here, after you've run the report, it actually gives you the option down here of summing the total of the report. And so now you can see the total sales. So not just the individual sales, but you'll see that it was a total of 22,500. All right, so I think that covers everything that you will need to do in your homework assignment. It will very closely mimic what I did here. It's just that the tables and the data are going to be a little bit different. So having said that, my recommendation is to get started on this homework assignment is look at each of the tables and the data in it. So for example, this is the donor table. So this is listing all the possible donors that you could potentially have. And then there is a fund table. These are the funds that can be associated with those donors that they can donate to. And then there's the pledge table, and this is the pledges that each of the donors made. And so you'll see in this pledge table, similar to how we had in our salesperson table, let's see if I can format these real quick so we can see all three of them, or at least see most of the data. There we go. You will see that in the pledge table, we store the donor ID. The donor ID relates over here to this donor table. So that's kind of like the sales to salesperson relationship. And then your fund table is kind of like how our product table was. In the pledge table here, our spreadsheet, it's showing which pledges that donor pledged to, and those or which fund those donors pledged to, and those funds are listed over here in the fund table. So I would recommend making sure that you're familiar with those three spreadsheets before you get started. All right, good luck on your database assignment.